Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I'm joined today by Kendra Wright, the founder of Rebel Media Agency, a full-service marketing agency that helps advisory firms replace random marketing tactics with a clear strategy that helps them move up market to serve larger clients and scale beyond referrals. Friend of the show, Carl Richards, has called her a marketing unicorn, while Michael Kitces credits their work together with driving a 58% increase in growth rates. She also did a podcast with another friend of the show, Taylor Schulte, and the name of that is Advisor Marketing Made Simple, and it's a fantastic look at their shared philosophy and some great tactics. Kendra, welcome to the show.
I am excited to be here.
Where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, so I pop around quite a bit. I spent time between Austin and Greenville, South Carolina, and I travel quite a bit too, so you never quite know where I'm tuning in from.
So Greenville, South Carolina, one of the coolest sleeper towns that I think maybe not people wouldn't Austin is well known for being weird and cool, but Greenville, South Carolina is such a great little town and a hidden gem. That downtown is gorgeous if you haven't checked it out yet.
You're absolutely right. And some people have no idea. I often joke that it's Austin, 10 years ago. I think it's a huge city coming up and it's a lot of fun.
Super cool place. Super cool. Well, I'm honored to have you today. I'm excited to talk with you about marketing. You've worked with some of the biggest names. You've driven some incredible results and excited in advance for what you'll share with our listeners today. You've worked with hundreds of advisors. What's the biggest lie they tell themselves about why their growth may be stagnating or slower than they might have liked?
I think really one of the biggest lies that a lot of advisors tell themselves, is kind of some form of either A, other advisors have figured out that there's some kind of secret that they don't know about marketing, or maybe B, they've picked the wrong channel. I decided to start a podcast and, that doesn't work. Or I decided to start YouTube and LinkedIn is easier. And so, I think that advisors having marketing success, they actually don't have a secret that other advisors don't have, but they usually have a structure that they've either discovered intentionally or unintentionally that does unlock kind of marketing that works. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about that if you want to hear.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, at this point, I've been in financial services for about a decade. I've coached 50 plus advisors just on my podcast. I work with a lot of advisors behind the scenes, and I study advisors who are seeing incredible success. And so over time, I started to look at what is the framework for the advisors that succeed versus those who struggle. And I've really come to understand that there's really kind of a 4-part structure. And it's 2 decisions you make up front and then kind of 2 that you build on the back end. And this is pretty much how I fix almost every advisor marketing funnel. So number 1 is we have to really start with answering who are we trying to reach with your marketing? And that sounds really simple and really straightforward, but this is kind of the thing that I fix most often for advisors. So what I need to find out from a firm is who is a client that is profitable, that you enjoy serving, who has expensive problems they would enthusiastically pay you to solve. And this is really important because we're going to take essentially this one client type and pair it with a channel. When advisors are talking to multiple kinds of people on one channel, instantly their marketing struggles. So you can have multiple client types, but let's say, for example, maybe you serve, tech execs and maybe pre-retirees, 2 super common niches. If you wanted to start a podcast, what I would tell you is, hey, if you're going to start a podcast, it needs to either be for tech execs or retirees, or you start 2 podcasts. So we get very narrow at the top and really understand who is a client that is profitable with big 6-figure problems that they are excited for you to serve. So getting clear on that is really important to start. And I think if we don't get clear here, everything downstream kind of breaks. That's kind of the first piece on fixing advisor marketing funnels.
So I feel like a lot of advisors try to be everything to everyone. The only ticket for admission is adequate AUM, and they don't always care where that comes from. But some of the most successful advisors I know have enormously dialed in psychographic profiles. What would you say to an advisor who is still trying to cast that very wide net to compel them to drill down a little bit to this more bespoke funnel?
Yeah, here's how I approach it. Because there's a lot of firms I work with that are a little bit bigger. They've got multiple client types, and you can serve multiple types of people. But when we go to market at scale to build organic growth, I choose one client type per channel. So let's say you wanted to start a YouTube channel to drive, organic growth. I'm going to ask you, do you want to talk to pre-retirees or tech executives or business owners? If you mix all three of those, this is going to struggle to convert. So it's not uncommon for me to work with a firm who might, let's just say, want to talk to tech execs and might want to talk to retirees. So I split it and I choose one per channel, even though they might serve a few different types of clients. So it doesn't mean that you only serve this type. But the problem is, let's say that, you had a podcast and you were marketing to tech execs, which is, W-2 and maybe business owners. If I were a listener to that podcast, everything tech exec related wouldn't apply to me. So half the content would just fall on deaf ears. So kind of figuring out who we're trying to attract with your marketing is the first part of that. And you don't have to just do one type of person, but we have to pair that with the next piece of this, which is the channel. So if you try too many client types, which is what most advisors do, it won't be sharp enough and it will break everything downstream.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've developed a really fine eye for this at this point. When you're looking at an advisor's website, their LinkedIn profile, their materials, or one of these channels, what are some of the signs of success you see, and what are some signs you see that something may be amiss or that is less effective?
Yeah, so I have this concept called ideal client clarity, and I'm instantly looking for it. And really all that means is, can I quickly see who you serve, and are you talking about the problems they care about in their words? And 95% of advisors don't pass this test. So let me give you a real example of what this might look like in the wild. So for example, I had a firm approach me, 6 months ago. They were spending about $20,000 a month in marketing, seeing virtually no results. So I went to their website, their ideal client, retirees, very standard for a firm. And their website header said something like, if you were me, what would you do? And their subheader said, isn't this what you really want to ask a retirement planning expert? And I was like, this isn't what people ask at all. This is not the problems they care about in the language they say it to you. So when I'm looking at their website, when I'm looking at their YouTube account, their LinkedIn, I'm instantly trying to find who they serve. Because marketing done well isn't just about attracting who you want, but it's repelling who you don't. And so I should be able to see that very quickly, when I look at any kind of marketing asset like the website, channels, and things like that. And really how you fix that kind of comes back to step one, which we talked about, which is getting really clear on who you want to attract with that channel. And then number two, aligning your website and your content to speak to those client types. So let's say you serve a couple different kinds. You could easily solve that in your website by just having a drop down that says who we serve. Pre-retirees, tech execs, business owners, with $1 million in revenue, whatever that looks like, that's fine. But if someone comes, let's say from your YouTube channel, and they don't see themselves on your website, you've essentially lost that lead a lot at the bottom of the funnel. So just kind of making sure, can I see who you serve? And are you talking about the problems they want to solve in their language?
So you are clearly someone who models this in your own life. The name of your organization is Rebel. You've got the rock star haircut. You've got the nose ring. I think many advisors say they want to stand out, but then they market themselves with compasses and sailboats and mountaintops. Why are we scared to deviate from the herd, and why do otherwise smart people sometimes gravitate towards sameness?
I think this is really human to just kind of gravitate towards that sameness. When we're looking to stand out with marketing, the problem with standing out is it doesn't happen on autopilot. So to stand out, you have to do a couple different things. Number one, you have to really intimately understand the people you want to serve and the problems they care about. You have to think also very deeply about what makes your firm and your process truly unique. Like your credentials are just not enough. And then number three, I think you have to build less things at a higher quality. And that is essentially kind of my mental framework of how we start to build firms that stand out. And really none of this is like fun. It's very counterintuitive to how we naturally operate, which I think is a lot of kind of like shooting from the hip, kind of changing strategies when you don't get results right away. But my perspective is that all these channels, they actually work. For most channels you can bring to me, I could tell you very quickly an advisor has built scalable growth. And so when it comes to standing out, it's really kind of, taking some time to really understand who you want to talk to, how you want to present yourself, and building at a higher quality of assets and websites and content. Like less is more. And what's kind of nutty is I have this weird knack of talking to a firm and they might come in spending, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a month in marketing, and I can cut usually at least half of their spend and not impact their lead flow at all, and then reroute it to a more cohesive strategy and actually change and flip their growth from referral led to like scalable growth. So that's what's kind of crazy is that it's not about doing, more. It's about doing things more efficiently and effective and more focused.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of like elephant gun sort of approach, this shotgun approach to trying to do things, throw dollars at it. And you're saying, look, if you've got the psychographics dialed in, if you've got the behaviors dialed in, you can be much more focused. You've mentioned a few groups a couple of times. I think, tech executives, entrepreneurs, dentists. I really consistently see advisors going after certain groups of people. And I mean, I get it. Like they're well compensated. Sometimes they have complex needs. Do you think there are groups that are routinely overlooked by advisors? Are there some sort of hidden gems in terms of groups that are perhaps underserved?
I think the hidden gems is who you actually want to serve that's profitable. I think a lot of times advisors hear these common niches and they say, hey, I want to work with lawyers or doctors or dentists. And then sometimes I talk to them and they don't actually really like serving those kinds of people. I think as long as you find a niche that is two things. Number one, it's large enough to be viable. And like some of the basic math I've seen is that if the niche is 10,000 people and you close like 1% of that, that's like 100 clients. So you can kind of make sure that niche is large enough to hit your growth goals. And then number two, they have expensive, kind of what I would call like 6-figure problems because advisors aren't cheap. And so we have to really find those ideal clients where maybe they have a tax situation, they've got, withdrawal sequencing, they got AMT, different things like that where people will enthusiastically pay you to solve those problems. And then the third thing I would pair that with is just, do you enjoy them? So are they profitable? Is the pool large enough? And do you enjoy working with them? And if you can find that for yourself, that to me is the best niche for you. There's not one that's overlooked. I think there's just so many people that could use great advice when you're solving the problems that they care about.
Yeah, I've really come across some really wild ones. Everything from yoga practitioners to defense contractors, things I never would have anticipated. But the most successful advisors in each case had some sort of organic tie to that group. The one, his father was a firefighter, and so he wanted to serve first responders so that these heroes would get the support they deserve. Another one had come from a defense contracting background and had special expertise there. So I think as long as it passes those different layers of your test, it's good to go. I think marketing is perhaps a bit like psychology in the sense that there are a lot of armchair quarterbacks. And, I think a lot of people know just enough to be dangerous or may have picked up some marketing advice here or there and may not be students of the game in the same way that you are. Do you hear pieces of conventional wisdom get passed around the advisory community that kind of make you cringe? Do you hear things commonly about marketing that you think are just wrong-headed?
Yeah, so this is something I said a few years ago on stage at Future Proof, and people looked at me like I was nutty. I think it's kind of starting to come back around. But for a long time, there was like this, beating of the drum about like an omni-channel approach. So more marketing equals more success. And I think if effort were the answer, advisors wouldn't be calling me. Like, it is not essentially more effort and more money that equals success. I think, kind of the opposite is true. Less marketing with a tighter focus and excellent execution is what equals success. So I see that kind of a lot. And then also sometimes I see people pay attention to vanity metrics. The other day I had a firm reach out to me. They said, hey, we're getting, more followers and views and things like that. And I think those are signals that, I want to pay attention to those, but I'm not in the followers game. I'm in the revenue game. So yes, we are going to pay attention to, a few of these different metrics, but at the end of the day, likes don't pay payroll. So we can't just keep burning cash. We've got to really pay attention to, different metrics across the funnel. Are we getting the right momentum? And then even if we're getting leads, are they closing? So I think some marketers, they think, hey, we got to follow, we got to view. And to me, that's the start of the process. We've got to really follow that all the way down through the sales process. So the conventional marketing wisdom that, I kind of think is a little backwards. It's just like more marketing equals more success, more views equals success. And it's just like, no, I think less marketing with a tighter focus and really making sure we're driving results from those views into clients that advisors can serve.
What's the difference between social marketing that might make someone Twitter famous or appeal to those vanity metrics versus the kind that's driving real revenue? Because I maybe don't see that as much anymore, but it felt like in the early days of Twitter, there was a lot of counting eyeballs and counting follows and things as if that was enough. And a lot of people sort of valued those things on their own and not in terms of the sort of revenue it could drive, and then ended up being disappointed, frankly, when some gaudy follower numbers didn't turn into much, much more than that.
Yeah, I think this one's really tough because there are advisors out there right now that if you looked at their content, there was an advisor I had a conversation with a few months ago, and he targets big law attorneys. And I looked at his LinkedIn and I was like, this guy is doing some gangster marketing. And I have a hunch that his funnel is working very well. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, can I talk to you about your marketing? I think it's working. He's like, yeah, it's actually working really, really well. And I was like, that's hilarious because I can only see about 5 likes on your post, but I could see who was liking his posts. And so it's not even big views that always matter. That's what's kind of cool about our industry. But I think you have to be very, very, very careful because I found that the advisors who have enough time to talk about things are not always, but often they might not actually be closing as much as you think on the back end. I've also gotten some calls from firms who need help. And, for example, I had another firm, they were getting like 30,000 views on their YouTube videos, but they were getting 0 clients. And in no universe is that okay. Like if I get you 1 million views, but 0 clients, I have not done my job. And what I found when I dug in was it was all paid traffic inflated. And it was just like, even to me, even though I've seen this, I think as an advisor, what you really need to do is you need to be really careful about who you emulate and who you learn from. Because sometimes the most visible people in our community are actually not the advisors who are crushing it. I've got some firms that work with me that are doing incredible growth. Nobody knows who they are because they're busy serving clients. So just be really careful. And I think, it's great to learn from other advisors, but make sure they're not just getting follows or views. Ask them about the revenue that is being driven by that marketing visibility.
Yeah. Do you find what's the relationship and what's the tension between strategy and tactics? When it comes to this, I find in my own marketing efforts, a lot of times I want to jump straight to tactics. Like, let's get going. Let's put something out there. And I don't know what's the right mix of strategy and tactics. How do you find advisors think about this and how do you end up counseling them in this regard?
Yeah, so the way that I build strategy is that a strategy should cut away tactics. It should actually reduce tactics. So for example, who are we talking to? I would know exactly who we're going to reach. Then I'm going to think about where are we going to reach them? So that's the channel selection. And, for example, when I look at channels for an advisory firm, I'll say, how do you enjoy educating people? How do you enjoy communicating about your craft? So you might like speaking or writing, and then I can use that to narrow down the channels. So for me, a good strategy will cut away the tactics. And then kind of a bonus thing that I like to add, it's kind of unique, is I also set non-goals. So I ask myself, what is the biggest threat to success for this strategy? And if I were working with you, Daniel, I might know Daniel's thinking about writing another book, but we actually haven't really made true use of the last asset we have, or we really need to grow his podcast before we would, sell that next book. So I might ask you to set a non-goal of not writing another book this year. And we agree on that in our strategy. So the relationship I see between strategy and tactics is that the strategy should cut away the tactics. And they kind of slim down, and then we can put the effort into the execution.
Yeah, I think that's almost the theme of the podcast, right? Is this focus and this winnowing. So I love that. Strategy is for cutting away tactics. And Kendra, somebody needs to talk me out of writing more books. Somebody's got to do it.
I am a great focuser. I pair with visionaries all the time. I have this insane ability to take creative people and point them in the right direction. They tell me their goals, and then I kind of bat away this other stuff. It's kind of a weird skill that I don't know how I got it, but I make a lot of use of it.
It's a gift. It's a gift. So behavioral finance teaches us that people don't buy what is objectively best. They buy, in many cases, what feels psychologically safe. And we know from the research on how people hire and refer and retain advisors that it is almost exclusively behavioral. What the research shows us is that it's not that technical chops don't matter. It's just that they're easily vetted. Someone can look on your website and see if you have a CFP or a decade of experience or good reviews or whatever it may be. And so then the way that we choose and retain and refer our advisors is largely based on how much we like them. Nothing, something as squishy as that. In their marketing efforts, how can advisors appeal to this behavioral layer? How can they help people feel safe? How can they let them get to know them without, making it all about them? How can they get that behavioral safety?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things in that regard that you can do. Number one, and you'll find that I come back to this over and over again. I think one of my zones of genius is messaging. What are the words that we can write that move the right people to action in our marketing? And so there's this quote that I love, which is business is really just solving, problems at profit. And I think that's kind of the foundation of good marketing. So the way that I craft copy that converts is I focus so heavily on using my clients' words. So the advisor's clients' words, and I show them that I get their world. And, for example, we had a client of ours who we just launched these niche pages, and one of them was tech execs. And we launched it, and literally someone applied to work with them, and they said, hey, I saw your page on serving tech professionals, and everything you said is exactly what I'm dealing with. Mm-hmm. We want to show these people that we get their world. We want to go really deep to understand their fears. So for example, another client of ours recently, I was listening to about 10 to 15 hours of their sales calls just to understand what are the problems people are bringing to them. And I basically cross-compared the calls that closed and the calls that didn't. And the number one thing that separated the calls that closed and the calls that didn't was they just spent a lot of time going deep and understanding the true problems that they wanted to solve. And so I think, when we think about how do we make people feel psychologically safe, we listen to the words they use and we mirror them back to them in a genuine way. And we go deep enough to understand the real fears they have. And then we also point out, hey, have you considered maybe this or that? Because I think one of the biggest reasons that people hire advisors is there's something they think they're overlooking. Even people that have done a lot of really good things. So showing them, hey, with my set of eyes, I hear you say you want to fix this and you want to fix this. Here's a couple things you might be overlooking. Here's a couple blind spots we've seen. And I just try to show those in marketing when we create website copy, when we create content. Those are the kind of things that I think just build trust overall.
Yeah, I love that. There was a study from Accenture a few years back that looked at what people were looking for out of their relationship with their advisor. Number one thing was I want to work with someone who gets me, someone who understands me. And I think marketing done well can lay that foundation so that the first time that person enters your office, they already know you a little bit from your podcast. They feel seen from some piece you wrote, like what you talked about. And there is just so much magic in seeing another person and seeing their concerns and having them feel understood. So I love that. So Kendra, this has been awesome. The last question I have for you, put yourself in the shoes of a young advisor who's starting out. They want to build a practice that is, has high levels of organic growth, but also builds a bit of a legacy and helps them, put some good in the world and put their stamp on the universe. What would you tell them? Like, what's the first step for this advisor to build a successful firm and a successful life?
Yeah. So, I think if you want to build a great life and a great business, I think the way you have to define this first is you have to really clearly and uniquely define for yourself what a meaningful life looks like to you. And then the business comes separate. And the reason why is because if you do them backwards, you might get a completely different answer. So for example, for me, something that I really care about is creating like meaningful experiences in my life. And how that's impacted my business is I only work with, a limited number of clients. And so when you're thinking out trying to build like a successful firm that is meaningful, you've got to really start with like that definition of your life and then fit the business inside of that. Otherwise, like I think a business can really kind of be like, an animal gone wild sometimes. Like there's always a desire for more. That monster of more is always there. And I think about the organic growth piece. If I were thinking about a young advisor, the first thing I always ask them is how quickly do you need this to work? Because there's this concept that I call marketing runway, which means from when you start to when you start cashing checks. How short is that? Because the shorter the timeline is, the less channels and tactics and strategies we have available. If you need money right away, you might work towards something like COIs. It's a faster strategy, or getting out in your community. If you have a longer runway, then that opens up a lot more channels, like building a podcast or building a YouTube channel or building a social media following. And so you've really got to think and kind of balance the time you have and the runway it takes to build some of these channels. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think if you can get really clear on who you kind of want to work with, even though you'll evolve it over time, starting there, choosing a channel that you love, one or two, and really being heavily focused on that, you're going to have a much better choice or chance. Because I have so many firms that come to me spending insane amounts of dollar bills, and I'm just like, this is not acceptable. So start with less is more, less channels, less client types, and then build from there.
All right, Kendra, this has been amazing. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find your work?
Yeah, just go to rebelmediaagency.com. I'm also easy to find on LinkedIn. That's a great place to start.
Okay, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.